Today, we are going to deal with a nuclear blast currently shaking the piano world. We'll talk about a brilliant book that proves we've been reading the score incorrectly for at least the last 100 years. I'll share some of the most staggering discoveries from this book, give you a quick review, and explain why it's still too early to throw away our beloved past piano recordings as obsolete or wrong. I even have a theory that losing certain traditions in the 20th century might actually be necessary, and that's a fascinating topic for speculation. So stick around. As some of you guessed, the book is The Secret Life of Musical Notation by Roberto Polli, a brilliant pianist and researcher. Here's a short review of some key ideas, just to set the stage. I will include some fragments of an interview with Roberto here, but if you want to watch a full talk, follow the link below. It's free. If you're serious about piano playing, this book is a must-read. You can grab it using the link below as well. From Haydn all the way to the early 20th century, long hairpins usually don't mean crescendo diminuendo as many musicians used to believe. Instead, they often signal taking time as you approach the end of the opening hairpin, and then returning to tempo as you near the end of the closing hairpin. Short hairpins, which in print are often simplified to accents, can mean voicing, highlighting a specific note, or simply marking the beginning of a subject for polyphonic clarity, like in this part from the Chopin sonata. When I first saw the Akir edition of Chopin, I immediately felt there was a reason why Akir uses long accents, staying closer to the Chopin's manuscripts. Chopin's accents are not percussive, they are agogic, shaping the time, not punching the sound. In his 20s, Frédéric Chopin was heavily influenced by great singers, and his accents, especially the longer ones, often indicate subtle vocal nuances, which he tried to imitate in his piano playing. Same with Schubert. My brilliant teachers taught me that Schubert's accents should never be played with a sharp percussive attack, but with a spread, singing approach, which automatically brings in a micro rubato. Roberto also gave a great tip for playing Chopin's mazurkas. When you see an accent, it doesn't mean that you just have to play this note louder. You can bring out the dance character of a mazurka by slightly delaying the accented note if it's not connected with a slur with the previous notes, like in this example. I don't even have to play these accented notes louder, I can just take time. And this allows me to preserve this curious but hesitant, very tender character. Because if I treat these accents formally, if I just play them as like dynamic accents, we immediately get this kind of like straightforward and pushy interpretation, which loses this fragility and this exquisite tenderness. And when an accent is under the slur, when we have an accented chord which is under the slur, we can take time directly on this accented chord. Like, for example, in this section. So I don't necessarily need to push them hard. I can play with more interpretational options. Long accents can also indicate rhythmic shifts, for example, in mazurkas, where a piece is in 3/4, in 3 beats, and suddenly moves in 2-beat phrases. And these markings aren't necessarily about dynamics, but about warning you that the timing changes here, that you have kind of a hemiola. And here where it gets really messy, because according to Roberto, long hairpins don't always mean rubato. Sometimes they just highlight an important voice for polyphonic clarity. Sometimes you get 2 hairpins in the same bar for 2 different reasons, like in this mazurka, where the hairpin in the middle means agogic flexibility, presumably, and the hairpin at the bottom, below the left hand, tells you that the left hand melody matters, but doesn't necessarily mean rubato. Roberto even shows cases where it's impossible to say for sure what the marking means. To make things worse, editions are often sloppy when transcribing manuscripts. They might replace long and short accents with only short ones, or move a long hairpin from above the staff to the middle, distorting the fact that it belonged to a specific voice. So we not only misunderstand the symbols, we also follow reliable editions that sometimes misrepresent the composer's intentions entirely. We cannot fully trust even the most reputable editions That was also a great reminder, because we don't really know whether they are really precise with the manuscript.
I mean, it's a disaster, really, if you think, because, of course, we are so married to the idea that this means something and that the placement where
Yeah.
the and in this case is should be honored. But then we actually discovered that that wasn't the intention, just because an engraver didn't have enough room in the middle, right? This happens all the time. I mean, that's why it's important to look at manuscripts and really understand the process of translation between a manuscript that reaches the publisher and the engraver starts uh, engraving these metal plates that were then inked and then transferred onto paper.
In a bold chapter on pedaling, Roberto also suggests an idea that at first sounds kind of crazy, but makes sense after his analysis. Chopin often wrote long pedal markings covering several harmonies, like for example one pedal for the whole bar where you have a few harmonies, or inner voices in the lower register, which sound muddy even on 1830s pianos, let alone modern ones. No one plays them literally today, of course. But what if Chopin actually wanted this blur, an experimental, pre-impressionistic sound, revolutionary for its time and still shocking in 2025? The pedal was a relatively new invention at the time. Can we be sure that composers at that time were so strict about it as we are now? When the pedal first appeared at the verge of the 19th century, Beethoven jumped right in, composing a piece that was supposed to be played on one pedal, never changing it. Of course, I'm speaking about the Moonlight Sonata. And that was an absolutely revolutionary fact for its time. Think about it. We've given rights to minorities, let women vote, legalized drugs, heard Stockhausen's wildest experiments, but we still can't forgive a pianist for playing two different chords on one pedal in Chopin. Isn't that crazy?
There's a system there that I noticed that is pretty much consistent throughout his life. And sometimes it's to create blurriness. And I'm not saying that blurriness was necessarily something unusual. It was just a desired effect. And there are cases where Chopin is completely arbitrary. There's one case in the mazurka where he overlaps two harmonies, and one in the first scherzo that I can think of, where, if you actually observe the pedal that he writes, it sounds a little striking. But objectively, the patterned writing of pedal markings is pretty much based on, if the harmony is the same and I want to hold the bass, then I will write a long pedal. And whenever my bass can be overheld, finger pedaled, if you will, and there are other things playing in the left hand and they can be reached, then I'm not writing the pedal.
Then there's an amazing chapter on rhythm. In Kinderszenen by Robert Schumann, for example, these 16 notes should be actually aligned with a triplet, although almost everyone plays like... But this is not correct. What Schumann meant here is a much more tender version. The same goes for Chopin's prelude in E major. If you see a 16th note, play it with a triplet. If you see a 32nd note, play it like a triplet 16th. So for example, this part, historically, if you want to play it historically correct, you have to play it like this. Although I have to say, I really, really like to make more drama here and to play these 16th notes and 32nd notes really sharper, creating this polyrhythm, like... Honestly, I'm not sure I even care if someone would tell me that this is historically incorrect, but that's, topic for another discussion. At least I was really happy and relieved to find out that my instinct about the Moonlight Sonata was correct. In that case, the 16th note does come after the triplet. So here... it's supposed to be not together. So, do we have now a situation where musicians have been playing everything wrong and mechanically without enough rubato? So we should throw away all the recent recordings for the last 100 of years, and only now, finally, are we enlightened enough to make good music again? Short answer, in my opinion, no. Yes, the meaning of some of these symbols was forgotten, and yes, there are many cases where we've fallen victims to misunderstanding them. One striking example, shown both in Roberto's book and also in Ben Lod's video, is Alfred Brendel, a pianist deeply committed to serving the music, trying to express something, yet he doesn't dare to take time to make a rubato, believing it wouldn't be correct, although the composers, with that hairpin, eventually gave him that freedom actually. And maybe that's why, despite all my admiration for Brendel, I've always preferred pianists who are a bit more daring and poetic with their rubato. But here's the thing. As I was reading the book, I realized that many of these ideas were already present even in my own playing, not alone the greater artists, and in the traditions I inherited, even without knowing the research. My brilliant teachers would always tell me that hairpins aren't always literal. Sometimes they shape the flow or guide the agogic timing. Take this Scrabin etude, for example. Even before I knew the research, I wouldn't do crescendo here, because here we have a progression. So it doesn't really make sense to make a crescendo here, because we have a resolution. And of course, I would naturally take time for this melody. So my intuitive execution, even before I knew all this research, would be in something like that. And then when we get to the next spot, this is such an excited event. Of course, I would naturally stretch time here, although I didn't know that this hairpin officially allows me to. Or for example, the next page. We have a beautiful second theme here, which moves down first. And it's really kind of sad and pessimistic, and you naturally would expect that this melody would continue. Something like that. But instead, midway, Scrabin changes the direction and it changes the character. So not only I would take time, I would actually allow myself to distort the rhythm and make it more Scrabin-esque here. Or for example, the next spot, where we have this ominous left hand. And of course, since this is piano and it has to be soft and kind of threatening, but at the same time hidden. It's like a small angry gremlin under your carpet, something like that. And of course, I wouldn't do crescendo here because it doesn't make sense. What I would do, I would take time to feel the intensity of this leap. Something like that. In other words, I can't speak for everyone, but at least in my musical culture, many music teachers guided us to feel the essence of music, to develop a nuanced sense of phrasing rather than a formal, mechanical obedience to the score. So no, it's not like that generations of dumb pianists were playing wrong and now we've been liberated. It's more like this. A lot of good musicians were doing the right things intuitively, and now we finally understand why their playing sometimes seemed wrong according to the printed page the way we understood it, while still being absolutely beautiful. That said, I will personally be revisiting many things, of course, and one of the most fascinating discoveries from this book for me is that this hairpin theory doesn't only apply to romantic music, it extends to Beethoven and Haydn as well. So it seems we could be far more flexible in certain passages in classics than modern traditions allow. But in general, I have to say many pianists didn't actually do such a bad job preserving at least the most crucial traditions of romantic music. In my opinion, the bigger tragedy is with Mozart and Bach. We, modern pianists, have almost completely forgotten how experimental and improvisational these styles once were. Instead, we've locked ourselves into a rigid, rule-bound, overly formal approach when it comes to Mozart, Haydn, Bach, Scarlatti, and many other composers of that time. For example, I recently went to a recital by Arkady Volodos. I was blown away by his daring, poetic rubato. his sense of time was anything but formal. And he even tried some really unconventional experiments with pedal and overtones, things any strict jury would instantly call wrong. And yet, it was almost impossible to imagine that Schubert or Brahms played more convincingly than what he did. The next day, we actually got to spend about 2 hours with Volodos, talking about music and his approach. And naturally, I was dying to ask about the details of music notation and his approach to it. But he didn't let me pin him down on technical stuff. He only said something like, you know, these composers always changed their mind. Today it could be like this, tomorrow like that. And of course, he studied the score very, very carefully. But what I took from his answer is that he cultivates a kind of deep sensitivity towards music he plays, living through the music until he can feel what it wants. He's not just a faithful executor of the score, he's an artist who in a way co-creates the piece with the composer. Seeing artists like him, I just can't agree that true musicianship is dead. Still, it's true that in the first half of the 20th century, tastes changed dramatically and pianists started to do much less rubato than they were doing before. But unlike many, I personally don't see that as a necessarily bad thing. I think actually it was absolutely necessary. But that's a topic on its own, and I'll talk about it in a separate video on rubato coming next week, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching this.